This is Dom Bettinelli, the CEO of SQPN, with a brief but very important message. For more than a decade, SQPN has produced the Catholic faith and pop culture podcasts that you love. We're a nonprofit organization, so it's only your generosity that lets us carry out our mission. We haven't run a fundraiser in 2 years, and that's why we need to ask for your help right now. Please make a pledge of whatever amount you can afford to help us continue providing your favorite podcasts, as well as exciting new ones we have planned. To make your pledge and find out about the free thank you gifts we'd like to send you, visit sqpn.com/give. That's sqpn.com/give. Thank you for your generosity. May we hear from you today? You're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, episode number 24.
Captain to bridge.
Spock here.
Make it so. Surrender is not an option.
Attention crew of the Enterprise, this is James Kirk.
We are all explorers, driven to know what's over the horizon, what's beyond our own shores.
We would have helped you get home if you had asked. That's who Starfleet is.
Hi, I'm Dom Bettinelli, and you're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, where we discuss the hidden layers and deeper meanings found in all the Star Trek TV series, movies, and more. And today we're discussing Deep Space Nine's first episode, The Emissary. Joining me today on the panel are Father Cory Sticha. Hi, Father Cory.
How's it going, Dom?
And Jimmy Akin. Hi, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
Okay, so today we're talking about Deep Space Nine's The Emissary. And this was broadcast. This was the pilot episode, the first episode, straight to syndication. As we remember, the UPN Paramount Network was Voyager, so this was before that, following the lead of Star Trek Next Generation, straight to syndication. This was January 3rd, 1993, which I realize is actually my daughter's birthday. Not 1993, my daughter's not that old, but her birthday would be 20 years later on the same day, which is kind of interesting. If I'd known that, I would have named her, Jadzia or something. Like my wife would have allowed that.
Better than Nerys.
Yeah, better than Nerys. Or Odo, actually, would have been a great little girl's name. So like you said, this is Deep Space Nine. It had 7 seasons, just like the Next Generation, just like Voyager, unlike poor Enterprise. And so, very interesting. Last week we talked about Encounter at Farpoint, which was the first episode of Next Generation. Apparently, Encounter at Farpoint was an inspiration for this story because human and alien, in which the human has to prove himself and all of humanity in a test that will last throughout the series. And it takes place on an alien station made available for Federation use on the edges of known space. That sounds familiar.
Only way better.
Only better.
To be fair, this was a much, much more effective way of telling that story than Farpoint was.
Also, you notice they did the exact same thing. And the writer of this episode even talked about, this was a swipe from Farpoint, where he said, you don't have to introduce the entire main cast all at once. You can introduce part of them halfway through, which is what they did here, and it worked fine. Yes.
Again, another good idea.
I think the one big difference about this story, though, is it does a much better job setting the tone of the entire series.
Oh, yes. Dark.
Very much so.
Dark.
Yeah. Well, and it's one of the first things I pointed out was like you go from the bright and shiny of Starfleet. Starfleet, it's all the ships are always brightly colored and the interiors are brightly lit. And then you go to this old Cardassian station that's dark and brutal and depressing.
Brutal, especially almost like the Cardassians invented brutalist architecture. I mean, the Cardassian architecture is very unhuman. It's not, it's very uncomfortable for humans to look at. But we don't
that's a trend in the series, too, is they talk about that, how it is very uncomfortable from a human standpoint.
Right.
They even talk about how the temperature is too hot because Cardassians, some like it hot.
Exactly. So, but of course, the episode doesn't start there. And in fact, it starts in a very unusual way for Star Trek.
With an opening crawl.
I know. A long time ago.
A long time from now.
In a star system far, far away. But we are at Wolf 359, and we see it's a very grim beginning. We see a battle. We see a civilian woman die. We see the main character distraught and grieving. Starfleet at its low point. That's a very different place to start.
And we see Captain Picard as a Borg, which is a really good thing. If you're any kind of fan of the original series, this is one of the most iconic stories of the Next Generation. Best of Both Worlds, parts 1 and 2 could have easily been a feature movie, and one of the better ones.
Right.
Exactly.
And to use that as our jumping off point, as our touchstone for this, is a really smart move in terms of grabbing the fans' attention and hooking them into the story.
And it really turns the story a bit, because what we have is the other side of that story, which is at Wolf 359, Picard betrays Starfleet against his will, obviously. But so how do other Starfleet officers feel about that? And this is that story. And in fact, as we go on, Picard and Sisko encounter each other, and Picard doesn't realize Sisko's story, and Sisko is hostile. He hates Picard. And that's again another very interesting choice. Here is Picard, beloved by Star Trek fans, and your main character of your new series hates him.
I love that line where, it's how did he put it?
Did we meet before?
We're meeting again, sir. We've met before, sir. And where? Wolf 359. And you just see Picard's face like, oh.
And brilliant,
just stuck the knife in.
Brilliant acting in that scene by Patrick Stewart, by the way. That uncomfortableness, the pain you see in his face, and then he quickly moves back to business, but that pain never quite leaves, and yet he's still all business.
Yeah, and also he on the writing level too. It's really nice here, because what do you say if you were Locutus of Borg and someone has just thrown that in your face, and there's no productive. I mean, you can't say I'm sorry because you weren't at fault, but your actions did hurt this person. I mean, you could say I'm sorry just as a matter of courtesy, but that's not. Picard decides there's no good way to respond, so he doesn't and just moves on. Well,
especially since it's an incident that Picard himself feels hurt by.
Yeah,
that
he was psychically and physically raped in essence by the Borg.
Exactly. And it is interesting contrast. Of course, this was sixth season of Next Gen. I can't remember when it came out. Sixth. To see the development of Picard, last week we watched Farpoint, and Picard just seemed like a stone, a rock.
Right.
There was nothing there.
Not in a good
emotion.
way.
Well, this wasn't like he was reliable.
Yeah.
He was, it was very just a jerk. Right. And then to see him in this, where he knows he needs to be professional, but to have that emotion as well.
Patrick Stewart has fully developed this character at this point.
I wanted to go back for just a moment. So after the opening crawl, we have the space battle against overwhelming force, and then the escape pod launches with the plans for the Death Star. And
oh wait, no, that's a little different.
Different podcast. Sorry, no, but I did want to say I thought the escape pod launch was really effective.
Yes,
because we see Sisko. He's been, drugged, screaming away from where his wife has just died, and dumped into an escape pod where Jake is. And then we get a POV shot on board the escape pod as it launches, and we see the ship that it was on just zoom away in the background under fire by the Borg.
Right.
And it's a very brief shot, but it's a really effective one.
Yes, it is.
Right. And then that ship blows up fairly definitively, not just fairly, but very definitively. So a couple
Your wife, she dead.
Yeah, a couple interesting points about that opening sequence. First, it's the only appearance of the Borg in Deep Space Nine, so we will never see them again. Which is interesting, given that Sisko's animus should also include the Borg. So very interesting. Right. But I think it would have been problematic in Next Generation. In DS9, because if you're on the station, there's no escaping from the Borg. You know what I mean? The station is stationary, so to speak. Yeah. So I can see why they would never show up. And you had plenty of other bad guys to deal with. Also, Did you recognize the Vulcan captain of the Saratoga? You might not have. We see him again later.
I recognized there was a Vulcan captain of the Saratoga.
Yeah.
Played by J.G. Hertzler, who was General Martok.
Oh.
Yes. Very interesting acting job there. So I thought that was very funny.
He really grew as General Martok.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, he did.
So the idea of taking your families into battle, this is something that has always bugged me about the Next Generation, was this idea of dragging your families along, especially when you know you're going into battle against the Borg at Wolf 359, that, like in Farpoint, they separate the saucer and send the families off safely. Like at that point, they knew that was something that should be done. Like going into a battle against the Borg like they were, like they knew the odds against them, and not evacuating the families beforehand. That seems incomprehensible to me.
Well, so, I mean, it does, but I suppose one can headcanon that on the grounds that the Borg attack was so sudden, they didn't have time to offload everybody.
Right.
And a lot of these ships may not have had saucer separation capabilities.
Right.
Because the one they're on is basically a saucer with a couple of nacelles. It's not like it has a secondary hull it can separate from.
It's essentially the Reliant from Wrath of Khan.
Yeah.
I get that. I mean, they could have put them on the escape pods to begin with and shot the escape pods off. But yeah, I know what you're saying. You had to ramp. I mean, there had to be this tension. There had to be Jennifer dying in this battle. I mean, that's
and what roles do those civilians play on the ship? You know,
right? Do they have actual? I mean, are they civilian employees?
Yeah,
right. I
mean,
get
we'd see that in Next Generation, where the civilians would have very important roles within the ship. They weren't just not all the time. I mean, most of them were like botanists and things like that,
or stay-at-home parents of that sort. Yeah. So we go from that scene to Jake and Sisko on a holodeck fishing, and I got
3 years later.
3 years, yes, 3 years later, on their way to Deep Space Nine. And so one of the ways that Deep Space Nine has been described is it's a Western about a man and his son who arrive at a frontier town with the country doctor, the barkeep, the sheriff, the mayor, the common man, O'Brien, and the native, Kira. I mean, it's sort of got that Western formula. And and so you have the man and his son. And I have to say...
You've even got the brothel owner with Quark as the madam.
Yeah.
Right. And what you have with Sisko, and one of the reasons I really love this series is Ben Sisko is not just a Starfleet captain. Eventually, he's a commander. He's a dad. He's a good dad. He's a father figure in ways that Picard and Kirk not only weren't, but couldn't be because of their personalities.
And he cares about his family more than he cares about Starfleet. And he makes that clear right from the beginning, where he's talking about resigning Starfleet if he has to take care of Jake.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. And which creates some conflict early on. So that's the first impression of Sisko and Ben. We get a first impression of Kira. Wasn't as good. I have to say, she comes across as very aggressive and combative. Now, keeping in mind,
she was meant to be Ensign Ro.
Yes,
and the actress Michelle, whatever her name is, Forbes decided not to do the part, and so they re-envisioned the Ensign Ro part as Kira Nerys.
In fact, the whole reason this was created as a show set on Bajor was because they wanted to build it around Ensign Ro. They loved that character and those episodes of Next Generation so much that they wanted to continue it on in this. I imagine what it would have been like to have Ensign Ro in this role.
I think I like it better the way it turned out. I think Kira Nerys is a better and more interesting character than Ensign Ro. One of the reasons for that is not just does she have more sides than Ensign Ro did, but she also is a sincere believer, and her faith, which Ro didn't have in the same way.
Yep.
Ro was kind of a lapsed Bajoran believer. but Kira is devout, and that really puts an accent mark over her relationship with Sisko as the emissary and with everything else going on with Bajor in the series.
Another aspect of Kira that makes her superior to Ro is that she was on Bajor the entire time as a freedom fighter, as a revolutionary, or whatever you want to call it, against the Cardassians, which colors everything she does in the series.
Yeah.
And makes one of the reasons why she is so aggressive early on. She didn't go to a military academy. She's not an officer with a, officer, well, in a lady or a gentleman, you know what I mean? But she was a rough and tumble terrorist, basically.
And you can imagine her frustration where they fought for so long to get their freedom, and they get their freedom and immediately, let's invite in the Federation. Well, she doesn't. She's not going to know the difference between the Federation and the Cardassians. All she knows is more outsiders are coming, and yes, they're supposedly having the hand of peace, but are they really?
Yeah, that was something I had in my notes, that Kira's concerns about the Federation are totally legitimate.
Yes.
She's just dead on. I mean, we know the Federation are good guys, or we think we do. But if you had just liberated your planet from one group of people who came in saying they were here to help, the last thing you want is another group of people coming in and saying they're here to help.
What if we had, after the Revolutionary War, we got rid of the British and the French came in? And the French came in like that. To kind of, we're here to help. Yeah, I'm not sure we would have been happy with it either.
That's what makes her such a endearing character.
On the other,
the development of that.
Yes, exactly. Yes, and on the other hand, the planet has been stripped of its resources. It's struggling to feed its people. They have nothing, and so you can also understand why the provisional government invited the Federation in. You've got a little of both.
I like, by the way, the realism of it being a provisional government, because that's what happens when you have newly liberated places. Is a provisional government is the first thing that gets established as a temporary measure before things settle down enough you can establish a regular government.
Exactly.
And to make it clear, this is 2 weeks after the Cardassians left.
Right.
We're not talking months. We're not talking years. We're talking 14 days.
And the station looks it, right? The Cardassians ruined the
station
place.
Looks it, but Bajor looks it. I mean, it's clear that this was very sudden. And
the Bajorans didn't win against the Cardassians. I mean, they didn't defeat them militarily. The Cardassians left because there was nothing left to take, and that's a very subtle distinction, but it's an important one throughout the series. So we also get introduced to Odo, who, interestingly, his makeup is not finalized at this point. It's much rougher.
I've been watching around in Deep Space Nine lately, and they actually seem to change his makeup several times before the end. But that's understandable, or at least justifiable in terms of on-screen reasons, because he is a shapeshifter.
Right. I always find it interesting that he can shapeshift to appear like someone else, but chooses for some reason on his day-to-day to just have this sort of putty-like face without definition.
Maybe it's less effort.
When he's not being Mr. Butterworth, the maple syrup man.
Right. Yeah. Again, a couple of nice moments in this episode where he gets to show off, this is what we're something we've got to work with in the series is a shapeshifter who can, go to places that he can't otherwise, etc. So that's interesting. We have a nice mix of Starfleet and non-Starfleet where they have to work together very clearly.
Miles O'Brien being an example of Starfleet that is working with these other people.
It's great to see Cole Meany get his moment here in Deep Space Nine. He was, as the producers said, they felt like his talent was being wasted as a transporter chief on the Enterprise. That he needed more to with this. I really love that goodbye moment that he had with Picard. That was such fun.
Where Picard's, but it's got the awful bit in it too about where Picard says, "I understand this was your favorite transporter room," and and even O'Brien says, "It's just a transporter room, sir."
Yeah, well, yes. Although I've known people who have responsibility for equipment, you have a particular affinity for certain pieces.
Right.
Oh yeah, that's truck number 3. She was my favorite, or whatever, that sort of thing. So
I get that.
plays.
I get that because I was a computer guy. I had servers, but there was one particular server that was mine.
Yeah.
That's one of the programmers was come. Oh, we need such and such and such. You're not going to do it. That's mine.
Right.
So I understand it.
Yeah.
I get it.
But
computer systems are one thing because they get personalized, but transporter rooms don't really get personalized. It would be like being a supermarket cashier, and it's like, ooh, I understand this was your favorite checkout lane.
On the other hand,
come on, Chief O'Brien had the little bobblehead that he stuck on the console
that we never saw.
He had it tuned just right for transport. One of the things that scene showed to me was how Picard has gathered around him a crew of people that don't leave generally. I mean, his crew has stayed with him, unusually so.
Bizarrely so, to the point
Right.
that nobody. I mean, they finally sort of kind of addressed the promotion issue on the show by giving people promotions in a way that didn't change their actual jobs.
Right.
But in the real military, you move up or
you move up and on into a new assignment.
Yeah.
Well, in fact,
it's like the whole thing with Riker, and he's been offered the captain's chair twice, and in the real military, if you say no twice to a promotion, they usually won't give you a third unless you're really hot stuff.
Right, exactly. And that's the tension between running a TV show and trying to be accurate to real life. Is you don't want to be sending your cast off, leaving them behind.
Babylon 5 handled it better, I thought.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen shows that do it. I guess they like to keep it together. But here, so you saw a moment where Picard did have to send one of his crew, say goodbye to someone who'd been with him literally from the beginning, as we saw. He was Paul Meany was in the very first episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation. So another character that we encounter early on is Kai Opaka. She is essentially the Pope of the Bajoran religion.
Yeah.
And very so. What the backstory is that
bizarrely she's in seclusion.
Well, yes. She was probably in seclusion to be safeguarded from the Cardassians at some point. But
that was so 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. So the backstory is they need the Bajorans. The Federation needs the Bajorans to get behind. We have to accept help from the Federation and become a full-fledged member of the Federation, because Bajor is a strategic point with the Cardassian. And in order to get that, they need her backing with the people in the government. They get that, they get the government.
Yeah, and notice how important religion is becoming here in an unprecedented way in Star Trek.
Right.
In neither the original series, nor the animated series, nor Next Gen, do we have a religion playing this big a role as it is in this series. Where it gets taken seriously and it's not just debunking God or an occasional reverent reference to God, but we have a real a religion being taken actually seriously here.
Right. And it's a religion that's not just kind of a vague spiritual feeling. It's a religion that's based on reason, based on practice. They've taken what the orbs have produced, have shown them, and they've developed this religion around that it's
they have ritual.
Really, like you said, it is something serious. It is not fluff.
This is a very practical religion. This is a very grab your ear and tell you you're the emissary religion.
Yes. They grab you right by the ear and pull you along. They have ritual, they have doctrine, they have hierarchy, they have it's an institution, very, very clearly, and it's a very ancient one. I mean, they talk about they don't say clearly how old the Bajoran civilization is.
Thousands of years, like at least 10,000.
Right, and probably more. I mean, they remember that that at some points there's talk about 45,000 years, which is, again, if you know your history, that's longer than all of recorded human civilization. 10,000 years. Our oldest records are 10,000 years. So, we're told that the Bajorans are a much older civilization than a human civilization. So there's that. So they may be down and out, but they're certainly not less than the rest of us, is the idea. Kaiopaka, she knows something about Sisko already. You know, there's somebody's been whispering in her ear about Sisko. And he's one of the things about Sisko in this episode that, you know, Avery Brooks's acting of that is all of Sisko's little expressions. He gets like amused smirks, or like when the holographic pool disappears and there's a staircase, he kind of gets that quirk in his head and a little like, huh, that's kind of cool. And you know, look on his face, and then follows Kaiopaka down.
Yeah. That's one thing I love when Sisko first meets Kira, and he almost has a look on his face like, oh, this is going to be kind of fun to spar with her.
Yeah. I was going to comment about a slightly earlier moment where, you know, Sisko, I have in my notes, he's just such a more likable captain.
Yeah.
At this point than Picard is.
Yeah.
Picard in his first episode was a passive aggressive jerk. And Sisko is a warm, caring guy with a range of emotions. You know, he genuinely cares about Jake, his son. There's a moment where they're in their quarters for the first time, and it's a total mess because of what the Cardassians did as they were leaving. It's sort of what the Democrats did to the White House when George W. Bush won and they were leaving.
Right.
You know, they've trashed the place. And so Sisko is standing there with Jake, and Jake is like, there is no place to sleep here except a cushion on the floor. And he's going, we're going to have to rough it for a while. And Jake is like, okay. And Sisko playfully, Avery Brooks chooses a line reading for the next word, which is, again, okay. And he could have just said okay in a matter-of-fact way. Yeah. And instead he says it in this playful way that kind of pokes fun a little bit at Jake and lifts his mood.
Yes.
And you get that is just such a great little touch. And then later when he's on the beach in the orb vision, and he realizes I'm back at the beginning of my relationship with Jennifer, and he just goes, ow! You know, it's just he's so joyful about that. Yeah.
Well, I love the scene where they're in the security office, and he's being as devious to Quark as Quark is to other people.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Whereas, you know, you don't want your nephew, your brother's son, to spend the best part of his life in jail, but you can become our community organizer.
Right. You can be the community leader. It's very interesting about Quark is that I think of anybody is his personality is sort of what it's going to be throughout the series. Yeah. Armin Shimmerman has got Quark down already. And it's a great character. I mean, but before Quark, the Ferengi were just annoying. No, like I didn't like any time there was a Ferengi episode in Next Gen, but Quark changed all that and made the Ferengi interesting.
Quark and Rom and Nog together all did that.
Although I got to point out that Rom in this episode is not the Rom that the beloved bumbling sort of fellow that we see later.
And that actually is a natural development of that character. I mean, they took him from being, you know, basically a thief and a liar to, well, the ensign.
Nog, you mean?
Nog. I'm sorry.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I thought you said Nog. Yeah, Rom. You're right.
All these 3-letter names.
I misheard.
Yes, but you're right.
Eventually, he's Mr. Progressive Enlightened Ferengi.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. But you're right about Nog. Nog has a very big journey. I mean, by the end, he's a battle-scarred war veteran with PTSD.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and an officer in Starfleet. I mean, that is quite the journey that he takes. It's it is great.
Of all of them, Quark has the least journey. His character is fully formed at this point, basically, and he ends right where he started as the barkeeper and, you know, kind of mainstay of the promenade. Right,
exactly. Yeah, everybody else has changed so much. One of the great lines from Quark in this episode when Sisko goes into the bar and asks, you know, how's the local synth ale? And he says, never trust an ale from a God-fearing people. And I'm thinking to myself, he's obviously never tried Trappist beer.
I wrote the same thing down. I got it right here.
There is a long history of alcohol brewing and monasteries.
Yeah. Maybe from certain Calvinist sorts.
By the way, you can tell how we think. We like beer, so we hear that line, so immediately, he hasn't had a good beer, apparently.
Well, I live within about 40 miles of the only Trappist brewery in America outside of Europe, so...
Actually, the individual things like that aside, the dialogue in this episode is way better than the dialogue was in Farpoint.
Yes,
with
very much.
With one exception, that is like a writing tick that they develop that is some kind of awful, which is a reference to a writing tick on Voyager.
Yes,
where the crew is always saying some kind of this, some kind of that.
Some kind of cloud, yeah.
Yeah. But in this, we have the prophets. When we finally meet them, they have their own writing tick, and we get just endless variations of it, like pleasure, what is this? Wormhole, what is this? Baseball, what is this? Die, what is this? I mean, I wrote down all those and other examples from this. What is this? Time. It's like, come on, you guys are supposed to be super knowledgeable beings. We shouldn't have to explain all these things to you. I mean, maybe baseball.
Well, it also begs the question, or raises the question, I should say, of what is this wisdom, the religious wisdom that they've been dispensing to the Bajorans for 10,000 years, if they don't know the first thing about linear existence? I don't understand.
This is a conceptual problem with the prophets, as serious, and the prophets also... It's like the series writers have certain knowledge gaps. Prophets speak for someone. That's what prophets do.
Although
they're not gods.
The popular conception is that prophets speak the future, and because they're nonlinear beings, they live in they live in the future and the past. I think that's the idea that they're trying to convey. I know that technically that's supposed to speak on behalf of someone else, but I think that's what they're doing.
Prophets are like oracles. They speak for a deity. Mm-hmm. They're not the deity.
Right.
I think the point, too, is that, they were putting out these orbs, but not necessarily for the Bajorans. At least at first, they don't say it's for the Bajorans. They said it was to reach other life forms, but they don't recognize linear life as a life form.
Right.
Yeah. It seems like, it's bizarre because it seems like the Bajorans have a much better understanding of stuff than the prophets they're worshiping do. Mm-hmm. And that's, it's like, have you actually met your gods? I mean, they're kind of clueless.
Right.
But yet the Bajorans are right that Sisko is their emissary and it's all really important. Except the prophets have no plan at this point for what's happening in the future. They really do come across as clueless wormhole aliens not as transcendent beings. They don't understand all kinds of stuff that they would have to understand just to communicate with Sisko, which is itself a flaw in the writing because they're having linear communication with him.
Right.
And there's a beginning, a middle, and an end to their experience with him and their conversations they have with him. So they clearly understand linear existence and time, even though they're saying they don't. That's bad writing. They also don't know that they don't know as much as the Kai. The Kai knew that Sisko's the emissary as soon as she grabbed his ear. And the prophets are having a much more intimate experience than that, and they don't know it. They think he's an intrusive alien, and they're about to kill him.
Right. Yeah. There are ways to retcon it, but it's just not satisfying because there are those flaws that you just can't get around.
And you have to wonder if they realized that after this episode was written.
Yeah.
Because they very quickly, they fill in a lot of those gaps that, the aliens are, wormhole aliens are aware of Bajor. They are aware of life outside the wormhole. They are aware of, the Sisko. They call him the Sisko.
Right.
And so they very quickly make that transition with the aliens.
Well, and then it turns out in the end that Sisko is half wormhole alien anyway. So yeah,
which is obviously something they came up with later as the series went along.
They backfill it. Benny wrote it into his stories. Sorry, that's for something for way down the line when we talk about that.
That's far beyond the stars, Dom.
Yes, it is. So, speaking of the prophets, in a way, this sort of mirrors Pike's experience in the Cage episode. Aliens bring him to an illusion of their life as it was or could have been. So that's Sisko's experience, and then Pike. I thought that was a very interesting thing, and I really like this idea where they basically give him some psychotherapy. Like, why do you exist in this place? Basically, Sisko, you haven't moved on emotionally or psychologically from the death of Jennifer, and they make him confront that.
And he doesn't even then really move on. It's not like he has a huge breakthrough and say, oh, you're right, I can put this behind myself now. Right. Instead, he tearfully admits, yeah, I'm stuck here.
Yes. I mean, talk about like an emotion-filled pilot episode compared, again, to Encounter at Farpoint. It's a much different experience. Yeah. The realm of the prophets, by the way, I felt like, especially where he's like overexposed and all in the whites, it's very womb-like, if you notice. Like,
and they put a heartbeat in the soundtrack to make it even more womb-like.
And every time you see him, by the way, on screen like that, they bring him closer and closer to the camera till the final one is just his eyes as he starts, as the tears come. I thought that was a very effective and subtle thing they did.
By the way, a couple of things to note about the writing in this compared to Encounter at Farpoint. In Encounter at Farpoint, even though they gesture at, my father was a Starfleet officer for Troy, and my dead husband, or Picard brought my father's body back to me and my mom for Wesley. They gesture to these little things. Right. They don't really drive the characters forward. And all the focus is on Q and what happened in human history and what's happening at the Farpoint station. It's all outward directed rather than character directed. And here we've met loads of flawed characters, and we know loads about their backgrounds and their motivations. And that's what's driving things forward.
And yet not at the expense of the action. I mean, we get the bleep gets blown out of Deep Space Nine, and it's like they blow the heck out of the Promenade, and I mean it looked bad before. It really gets messed up in this one. I mean, there's action galore in this episode, so it doesn't suffer for that. Couple other things. So we get Dax and Bashir, like we said before, they're introduced later. They show up, further on in the episode. Bashir kind of comes across a bit of as a jerk, actually.
A bit of a jerk?
And apparently intentional. He was supposed to be kind of clueless and jerkish and grow as the series went on.
And you can do that with an ensemble cast. Just don't do that with your main character who's a Time Lord.
or captain of the ship. And so we established his hots for Jedzia early on here. The thing was very embarrassing moments, I have to say. But we also see him really put his foot in it with Kira. Oh my gosh, it was so bad. Like talking about how, I asked to be out here on the frontier in the wilderness where it's so primitive. And she's like, you can see her in the background getting angrier and angrier.
That's just a great scene. That's just a great scene.
And then she holds his feet to the fire saying, you'll find we are a simple but friendly people.
She's like 2 inches from his face ready to
yes, that was
strangle him.
Incidentally, this is something they certainly didn't mean at the time, but in view, what he says at one point is one of the most remote outposts was where he wanted to be.
Yeah.
And that actually makes sense in terms of what they establish about him way down the line.
Right.
Which is his genetic engineering.
Right.
Because if you're genetically enhanced and don't want anybody to know about it, going off to a remote outpost to practice medicine rather than being in the center of the medical establishment is exactly what you would want to do.
Exactly. Coming to the Starfleet version of Malta, Montana versus, Boston or San Diego.
Right. Except then it turns out there's a wormhole to the middle of Beijing in Malta that everyone's going to start using.
I was going to say Canada. We've got a port to Canada. It's only 60 miles away. No,
well, there's that too. But it turns out this is going to now be the crossroads of the Alpha Quadrant.
Yes.
So, and then we have Dax, who is a Trill. We've seen Trill before, but they completely change the Trill from the next gen Trill we saw.
Right, and for the better. The spots are much more attractive than the head bumps.
Right. In fact, the producers clearly said that Terry Farrell is way too attractive to cover her face with the prosthetic. Just let her shine through.
And not to mention, it's much easier to do the little bit of makeup for the spots than it is the prosthetics.
And then we have the symbiont is actually a personality that is imbued, that is carried, and as a combination of personalities. One of the things I find interesting is like immediately Dax reestablishes this relationship with Sisko that he had with Curzon Dax, even though it's clearly set. I don't know if soon they set this idea that the symbionts aren't supposed to maintain the old relationships from the old hosts. And I don't know why they bring that up later on when they've clearly first established that Curzon was friends with Sisko, and they've maintained that relationship, old man.
I think it's that they do want the symbiont to have a wide diversity of experiences, but when it becomes a bright line about who you're not supposed to reassociate with, it's like former spouses.
Yeah.
Former friends are one thing, but you can have friends from one host to another, but you can't have the same spouses.
So when you regenerate, you can't have the same companions at the old. No, that's something different.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's an interesting little tidbit. The scene where Odo is assisting Bashir in treating the wounded on the promenade, and Odo is very uncomfortable about like holding the wound.
Yeah,
is a tip of the hat.
Great.
It's a tip of the hat to a scene from the movie MASH, where Rene Auberjonois played Father Mulcahy and is asked to assist a military surgeon in the operating room, and awkwardly complies. So they very intentionally had this moment where they did this. It was kind of fun. Yeah, I had forgotten that Rene Auberjonois played Father Mulcahy in MASH.
Yeah, he's played a lot of different parts. He's been a very diverse actor.
Well, I knew him before DS9 from the TV show Soap, and then
Benson.
He also in Benson too? Yeah.
Well, no, he was Benson was where he really was. He played the assistant to the governor in Benson.
Oh, right.
And before that, he had I remember seeing him on the Bob Newhart show where he played a psychologist from France.
Oh, okay. Interesting. And then, of course, I knew Avery Brooks from Spencer for Hire, which was a set in Boston private detective where Hawk was just the coolest character of all. And I always thought Avery Brooks was really cool. So I'm sure that influenced my assessment of him as like my favorite captain. Incidentally, I prefer the bald Sisko with beard.
Everyone does.
To the clean shaven Sisko.
I heard Terry Farrell describe this version of Sisko as a black Ken doll. Everybody agrees he's way better once they let him shave his head and grow his goatee.
Yes.
Again, the beard again.
The beard. When the beard shows
There's something about Star Trek and the beard.
When Riker gets the beard,
growing the beard increases the quality of the show.
So another thing we get about Sisko established in this episode is his love of the ancient and archaic game of baseball.
Which is the reason why I like Sisko so much. No.
Yeah, I mean, and that's one of those endearing aspects to his characters. I mean, it can be a little annoying sometimes when you're watching these futuristic sci-fi shows when the characters, they love something that's from the 20th century. Like you had...
Spring Ball or whatever.
Well, that's actually at least a futuristic game. But I mean, like when Riker was a jazz aficionado, or when Tom Paris loved 20th century TV. I mean, it's like of all, like, that's like saying, like having somebody from the 21st century, oh, I'm an aficionado of, 18th century plays, street plays or something. It's sort of a strange affectation, but it's quite obviously a way to appeal to the audience in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
But this...
You're saying this like it's odd. I mean, I like The Emperor of the Moon by English playwright Afra Ben.
If anybody would be that character, Jimmy, that would be you. I mean, I really picked that out of thin air too. But with Sisko, it doesn't feel like it's an appeal to the audience in that sense, in the same way, a pandering to the audience. I don't know. It just feels like they're trying to do something that humanizes him, that really brings him down to earth.
It's not driving the plot the way it does in some of these other cases. It's just a bit of humanization.
There is a funny moment where, like, he's trying to explain linear existence and love and death, and then when they ask him, what is baseball? And he's like trying to explain, he goes, I can't explain it.
The rules don't matter.
Like, having just tried to explain baseball to my 9-year-old, I can really understand how difficult that can be. So we go. I mean, we could talk a little about the overarching story, which is the discovery of the wormhole, the movement of the station from around the orbit of Bajor to the Denorius Belt, to claim to this. I mean, in one sense, as Kira recognizes, this puts Bajor on the map and really takes Bajor from failed, destroyed planet to now we have something to build on to really defeat our people from the trade that will pass through this station.
Right.
I mean, it's an interesting device that they've come up with, this idea of a stable wormhole to another quadrant, that this people now have control of.
If only it went to the Delta Quadrant instead, we would have saved ourselves a whole series.
And then we could have just had them getting to the wormhole. Yeah.
So in this one, for people who know, Voyager goes to the Delta Quadrant. In this series, the wormhole goes to the Gamma Quadrant.
Right.
Which and it apparently drops off about the same distance away, 70,000 light years, is what they say in this episode. And how they establish that is kind of weird, because when they get to the other side of the wormhole, Sisko and Jadzia run a star check to find out where they are, and they realize they're 70,000 light years away. And it's based on probes they sent in the 22nd century to map the Gamma Quadrant 200 years ago in Enterprise's time. Really, that far away?
I suppose, like a ship traveling at whatever the highest warp at the time, let's say it was warp 5, takes 100 years to get there, sending back data the whole time.
Yeah, but then you should have a map of everything in the in the Gamma Quadrant, and for that matter, all of the other quadrants if you're sending things out that far. And you ought to know where all the species are, because of course you're going to not just map stars, you're going to look for signs of technological life.
Well, you could just to play a little devil's advocate. Like the probe would not necessarily have had to go to the star system to map the star.
No, but it would have gotten close in order to see, because you can't just look through the star clusters at the center of the galaxy.
Right.
You've got to get on the other side of them to do that map.
Right. So it might have been close enough to see the star and identify it, but not close enough to see the civilizations.
Except we know now how easy it is to spot civilizations.
Well, we also see how in the Delta Quadrant it's littered with the detritus from Earth probes sent out from Earth, including Amelia Earhart and a 1947 pickup truck floating in space that we happened to run across. So yes, that is apparently true. Any other observations or notes that you guys have, Jimmy?
I've got a few notes. When Sisko is in the orb vision, and I like the orbs, and I like that they're these religious artifacts that can give you a real, genuine experience of some kind. because that makes it very concrete and communicates to the viewer that this has to be taken seriously. It's not like we're going to make fun of this tribal religion here. But when he's in the orb vision, he says he and Jennifer are on Gilgo Beach, and I didn't know where that was, so I looked it up, and it's in Long Island.
Yeah.
But wow, does it look like Santa Monica Beach to me?
That don't look like Long Island to me.
Yeah, those rock formations there. I thought it was an awesome scene he has with Jennifer, where he's back at the beginning of his relationship with her. As a widower myself, I would totally have the same reaction he did. I thought that was very human. I thought it was interesting. He says, my father was a gourmet chef.
Yes.
Later, his father is a gourmet chef. There's nothing past tense about it. But his father's signature dish, according to this scene, is aubergine stew. And it's like, really? Eggplant stew? That's what you want to serve this woman?
Well, it's probably a really good Cajun dish, I have to say, or Creole.
Yeah, but eggplant is just not the most romantic thing I can imagine. I thought we get to see Morn for the first time in the bar in this episode. So he's right there from the beginning. I thought it was interesting and not plausible that when the prophets have Sisko and Jadzia in the runabout, they like beam Jadzia back to the station, but keep Sisko. Yet they don't realize he's the emissary. So it's like, on what basis why don't you keep them both and let them both have visions with you? It didn't make any sense to me why. I mean, I thought it was lazy writing to just get rid of Jadzia so we can focus on Sisko. Also, the idea the prophets are nonlinear makes absolutely no sense if they're worried about being destroyed. You either are going to be destroyed or you're not. And if you're nonlinear, you already know that. So that doesn't make any sense.
And they also don't know what to die is. So
yeah, they don't know what to die is. I did think, and we talked about how the cage was viewed as being too cerebral by the studio execs back in the 60s. This was way more cerebral than the cage was. Yeah. And I noticed they didn't even explain what linear means to the audience. Well, linear means it's like a line. They didn't even do that for us. So they were assuming quite a bit of knowledge there. I liked when they're about to have the battle with the Cardassians on the station. At one point, Major Kira yells, "Shields up!" And Miles O'Brien says, "What shields?" It's like, that's such a great moment. Yeah, this is not a spaceship. This is a space station.
Yeah. Miles O'Brien had some great one-liners and scenes, and especially in that part of the episode.
Fire the 6 torpedoes. That's all we have. We're not going to win this with torpedoes, Chief.
Yeah. Another couple of weak spots in the writing when they've established, when they get the Cardassians back through the wormhole, which defuses the current crisis with the Cardassians. They just totally gloss over and say they had some problems on the other side, and that's why we're towing them back. But we never saw any of those problems. We don't know what disabled their ship. It wasn't the prophets. They were in the Gamma Quadrant, or the Gamma Quadrant.
Right.
So we jumped over some plot there.
Well, they did show the Cardassian ship coming out of the wormhole and was sparking and lightning all around it and everything. So I think they're implying that something inside the wormhole caused the ship to be disabled.
They didn't say that. They didn't. Something happened to that ship, and we didn't see it happen in the wormhole. No. The last we saw of that ship, it was in the Gamma Quadrant. So we don't know what happened there or how it got back into the wormhole. But in any event, we jumped over some plot, is my point. And we jumped over another piece of plot too, because now all of a sudden traveling through the wormhole doesn't hurt the prophets anymore the way it did when Sisko and Dax first entered. That was what was the big threat to them, is you're traveling through our spaceman, and that hurts us. And now it doesn't for some reason. Then at the end, we have the just to wish him luck trope with the reappearance of the character from the primary show stopping off. And in this case, literally wishing Sisko luck in
Right.
his new assignment. But one thing Picard says in the course of that speech is this station is going to become an important center of commerce, thus once again revealing that money exists in the 24th century.
Right. Especially with the Ferengi involved. Actually part of the loss, the skipping of the plot pieces here, there were 24 minutes of footage that was cut from this that they had filmed.
Oh, wow.
And in fact, people involved with this, including the director, hope that someday there'll be a special edition produced that restores some of that. The teaser was much longer, establishing what happened, with the battle with the Borg. There was
that
also
could be why we got the crawl to summarize things quickly.
Mhm.
yes. There was also a deleted scene that featured Sisko bringing the orb back to Opaka. And let's see, he tries to tell her that he believes the prophets to be wormhole aliens, but she tells him, I don't want to listen. This is why a disbeliever was destined to seek them. One should never look into the eyes of his own gods, which is a line that actually comes up at the end of the first season in the finale when Wynn, who's still a Vedic at that point, says, when she was once asked Opaka why an outsider was chosen to speak to the prophets,
Right.
that's what she said. So that idea of is included. So there's a number of scenes that were cut. So 24 minutes of, which is a lot. I mean, that's nearly 2/3 of a full episode. So do you have any last notes, Father Cory?
Just one real small thing, a music note, no pun intended.
Ooh, I saw what you did there.
I realized as soon as I said it. When the Enterprise left the station for the first time, it started out with the TNG theme that immediately transitioned to the DS9 theme. Kind of a nice musical touch there of that handing off.
That's true. That is a very good a good notice on that one. Looking at the cast as a whole, just as a last thing, Odo is clearly supposed to be a kind of Data or Spock, who's the outsider looking in on humanity. The Quark provides some humor and some built-in conflict. That he's clearly not Starfleet, Federation quality. He's established as underhanded or unethical at best. So it's very interesting to see and then as we noted in our overview, they broke Roddenberry's golden rule. There's lots of conflict among characters.
And I saw an interview with I think it was with Rick Berman, about that, where he was saying the way they did it was because he tried, even to the writer's annoyance, to uphold Gene's vision of things and bend the rules rather than break them outright. And the way they bent the rule in this case without breaking it was they introduced all these non-Starfleet characters. And it's them who have the real conflicts with each other. If you look at the Starfleet people, they may have a little friction, but it's not the same kind of conflict.
Apart from Sisko and Picard. Which even by the end of it, they're kind of reconciled. Yeah. And that's kind of a special circumstance for both of them. That's true.
It's interesting you mentioned the cast makeup. And we noted in talking about Next Gen that the cast is kind of essentially a remix of the elements of the original series cast. So like Spock gets split into Data being the logical one, Worf being the most alien one, and Deanna Troi being the half-breed with telepathic powers. But here, you really don't have that. I mean, you do have Odo as the most alien person, and kind of as, he's kind of like Worf, except he's more vulnerable than Worf, and he doesn't have the warrior thing going. He's just got the law and order thing going.
Yeah.
But you really can't map the characters of the original series onto these guys the way you can in other series, including not just Next Gen, but Enterprise as well.
That's true. Yeah, very clearly in Enterprise. Just the last little bit of trivia is this episode was nominated for 4 Emmy Awards, which only 3 other episodes of Trek were nominated for that many Emmys
Wow.
in a year. All of the usual visual effects and sound editing and set direction or art direction categories. The Trek doesn't get the respect of the actor and the prestigious ones like that. But at least they won for those, so good for them. Dennis McCarthy, who's the composer, did win for the award for the theme music for the series, so not just for a single episode. So it's interesting. All right, so I guess that's it from us on the Emissary. So we'll throw it out to you, the listener. What do you think of what we had to say about the Emissary? What do you think of the Emissary episode? Let us know. So go to sqpn.com/Trek or to the SQPN Facebook page. Find this episode there and leave us feedback in the comments or send us an email to trek@sqpn.com. You can find links relevant to our discussion on our show notes at sqpn.com. Please go to iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, TuneIn, and Stitcher to subscribe, to leave a review, to leave a comment. Please share, like, retweet, do all those things. Let other people know about the secrets of Star Trek so that we can spread the news and grow our audience and reach more people with our discussions. We're having a blast, and we hope you are too. We'll be back next time when we'll be discussing Voyager's first episode, Caretaker.
Oh.
And that was Father Cory's sigh.
So it's like all the pilots to the even-numbered Star Trek series are good, and all the pilots to the odd-numbered Star Trek series, something like that.
Well, maybe Broken. Well, we'll have to see when we get to Broken Bow whether that holds up. So until then, Jimmy Akin, thank you for joining me in sharing the secrets of Star Trek.
Live long and prosper.
Father Cory Sticha, thank you as well.
Well, thank you, Dom.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Star Trek on StarQuest. And remember, please check your paw before heading out to the Gamma Quadrant. This is Dom Bettinelli again. We hope you've enjoyed this podcast and that you'll help us keep producing the podcast you love. Thank you for your generosity. To make your pledge and find out about the free thank you gifts we'd like to send you, visit sqpn.com/give. That's sqpn.com/give.